movement. How much movement during the day? What does that do for you? And how does it really enhance deep quality restorative sleep? So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to press on the button below, have some fun, and see what tiny little things you can integrate into your life. They're quick, they're easy, they're seamless, they take no time at all. But if you start to think about what you're doing and how you're doing it vastly differently, you too will have more energy on a daily basis. Sleep is your superpower. Eat, drink, movement, and other lifestyle habits. Your habits today inform your biology tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Nicky Rowbotham, author, speaker, and I'm here today to talk to you about a subject that's very close to my heart: embracing your personal power. In fact, it's a concept that I call in my latest book, Embrace Your Elegant Power, because really, I believe that it is our path to success through ease. And I've had so many people say to me, but Nix, life isn't easy. But I always say to people, it may not be easy. Stress will always happen to us, but we can bring more easefulness in terms of how we really approach our lives and what happens to us. I've also written a book called 7 Steps to Finding Flow, which talks to our stress response and how we often get triggered in situations. But what I really came to understand through all of this is that really most of our personal power is where it begins, when we stay centered and focused within ourselves. But most importantly, it's when we start to trust ourselves again. I've seen too many people who step out of their power and really start to give their power to someone else, or at least give that, control over how they react to someone else. Because when we don't trust ourselves, we become untethered. And when things happen, which they always do in life, that's when we almost become buffeted by the winds of life, as I often call it. As things happen, other people react, deadlines come into our ecosystem, that's when we can really become uncentered and move out of our personal power. But when we start to step back into our personal power and really own it from a place of self-worth, self-love, and being enough now, that is when the game changes. How we really start to own our power in the now moment, and I say the now moment, is really where it all begins. Too often I see people who really spend all of their time regretting the past, analyzing the actions or the scenes that have played out in their past, or really future projecting, forward projecting to something that might happen in the future. But when we don't stay present in the moment, giving our intentional focus to right now, the conversation that we're in, the problem that we're trying to solve, the relationship or connection that we're busy with, that's where we start to dilute that power, because we give part of our power to the past or part of our power to the future, and we step out of that centered space. The biggest gift we can give anyone in our lives is being present now. That's where we show up with all of the gifts that we have. Think about when you come home from a long day at work and you're either at home with a partner, on the phone with a friend, or with your kids. And if you're still playing out, everything that happened during the day in your head, or really starting to think about that to-do list for later on this evening or the next day or the rest of the week, that's where we really start to fragment our attention. And all anyone ever really wants from us is that gift of our presence in the now moment. It's so important. But what is personal power? It's our essence. It's innate to every single one of us. And I think too often we think that it's something that other people can take from us. And there are scenarios that really do impact our personal power, and those are the really severe traumas that happen within our lives. But on a day-to-day scenario, it really is the fact that we've allowed our power to be diluted. We need to step back into our power. We've never lost it. We've just maybe forgotten how powerful we truly were when we start to really center into our unique gifts. The magic that we bring in terms of all of, the experience that we have, the facets of ourselves. And I often talk to people about, think of a diamond. All sides of us are valuable. We can't downplay them and keep certain aspects hidden in shame because we think that they won't be valued as much as some of the attributes that we often think society values the most. And it's so interesting. I was in a talk the other day around exactly this, and there was a divine woman who was a lawyer and a vegan food photographer, and yet she kept that passionate creativity about being a food photographer hidden in shame, thinking that she couldn't be both logical and creative. And one of the things I said to her, when we hide parts of ourselves in shame, not thinking that they're equally valuable and that they can shine if we just, like a diamond, bring it to the light, it's almost like everyone else around us feels that sense of shame, feels like, these are things that we don't value as much, or, we almost project that lack of worth, thinking that people will only value the things that we think society values. I've often joked that it sometimes feels like if we didn't master these sort of 5 to 10 attributes, and I think we all know them, public speaking, being a good leader, being super confident, sometimes overly confident, it feels like we've lost out on that universal lottery. But what I often say to people is everyone's gifts are special and unique. It's part of that true mix of diversity that we really need people to bring through, because that's often where the hidden gems lie. That's often where we really start to bring through all of the sort of points of view that could really help us come up with the best solution. People often confuse power and force, and it's something I see happening so often. And in fact, it was something that happened when I actually came up with the title for my book, Embrace Your Elegant Power. A friend of mine said to me, but you're all about soul, flow, and grace, bringing through those radiant feminine qualities now, rather than stepping out of what I call a masculine shield that I used to show up within the corporate environment with over 20 years of leadership experience in corporate. So many people find that incongruous, that how can I be talking about embracing your power, but yet I am bringing through a balancing in feminine and masculine energies. But that's when I really crystallized for them that we've confused power and force for so long. It's one of those things that we do every day, and we all know what power and force feels like when we experience it. But we often haven't really understood those concepts fully. Force is one of those crass, dense energies that demands a counterforce. We all know what it's like when you had someone almost come at you, someone who's come with that energy that feels overly arrogant, overly confident, and sometimes slightly bullying. It almost feels like you either have to shrink and move away or stand up for yourself. That's force. Power is something different altogether, and that's what I want people to start to really understand for themselves. Power is magnetic. Like gravity, it moves things without having to move itself. That for me is one of the most easeful, expansive and light energy we can bring through, rather than that dense feeling around force. And I think it's so important to start to understand in scenarios within your life, maybe introspect around how you've shown up, how other people have shown up in your lives, and understand the energy behind it. Is it power or is it force? We need more people to be standing in their own elegant power, really owning their gifts, knowing that they are enough now, and not having to make someone else feel small or shameful for showing up as themselves. One of my favorite quotes that really embodies power is the quote by Anne Lamott, and it's about the lighthouse. A lighthouse doesn't run all over the island looking for boats to save. It just stands there shining. It's such an important concept for us to grasp, and I think that's where we start to understand where for many people, including myself, if you'd spoken to me 3 to 4 years ago, and I still slip into this occasionally, I used to think that I could make everyone happy by giving them everything that they wanted. I possibly would have looked like a schizophrenic glowworm, running all over that island, thinking I could save everyone, that I could be everything to everyone else. But actually what I realized is that especially in the roles that I was playing within corporate, as myself as a leader and a speaker, often I needed to show up for myself first. When we show up for ourselves, that's where we start to tune into our best energy, bring our unique gifts to the fore, and that's where we bring our magic into the environments that we work in. Where does this all start? Self-ownership. I often say that the greatest form of self-care and self-love is self-ownership. And I get a lot of people saying to me, but surely it should be taking a holiday, having a rest, a salt bath, going for a massage, building micro breaks into your day. And I'm an advocate for all of those pauses for potency in our lives. But if we don't have a solid foundation in self-ownership within our lives, that's where we really don't own our own authority. We chase the gold stars of everyone else's authority, thinking that they should know better for us, better than we know for ourselves. But actually, that's the least empowering thing we can do. We have to empower ourselves by standing in our own self-ownership, following our own North Star that says, right, intuitively, I know exactly what I need to do for myself in this scenario. I can pay attention to all of these other things that are happening, but really, kind of like a seashell, when you're walking along the beach, you pick them up, you have a look at them, you decide whether or not they serve you, and if they don't, you put them down again. We need to start to then become our own authority within our lives, doing the things that really serve us. And sometimes it's the uncomfortable things. Sometimes it's doing your finances and a budget, submitting your tax return, going for a health check-in. But really it comes down to taking care of our own side of the street. We have to make sure that we're looking after how we're showing up. Are we showing up in that energy of power? Are we inspiring others as that lighthouse in our own life and inspiring them to do the same for themselves? Because all of a sudden we set the tone that says there's a different way for us to show up. And part of that is looking at the stories we tell ourselves in our own life and understanding whether or not they still serve us. When I talk about the stories in our lives, I talk about the shoulds and the fact that we need to unshackle from the shoulds in our lives. The stories we tell ourselves in our lives really become insidious. They creep into our everyday. And I often say to people, one of the best things you can do is actually just pay attention. Bring awareness to how many times you say should during the course of a day. These stories we tell ourselves in our lives are nothing new. They're constructs that we've had since childhood, and they creep in so many different ways. They can be expectations, they can be conditions, judgments, assumptions, perceptions, shame. And we have to really understand where something has been a sense of conditioning in our lives, something that we've just become used to, rather than a conscious choice, because it serves us and it lights us up. It says, yes, this is something that really serves me in our life, rather than someone else, an authority outside of myself, has told me that I should be adhering to. And of course, I'm not obviously talking about things like, please don't drive after drinking alcohol, because that for me is one of those shoulds we absolutely have to adhere to. It's a law. I'm not encouraging lawlessness here. I'm encouraging all of those other stories that show up within your narrative day to day. Mine started when I was a little girl, around, right, you have to go to school, you have to show up in a certain way. you have to achieve good grades and then go on to university, climb the corporate ladder. And I think we all know where then that progresses in terms of relationships, kids, marriage, you name it. Shoulds are everywhere within our lives. And we often think that fitting in, conforming, is safer. But when we adhere to stories that no longer serve us, we chart an inauthentic path for ourselves. We stay stuck, we stay small. It's almost like our bodies and our nervous systems know that those stories no longer resonate within us, with our soul, with the journey we really want to chart, but maybe we're staying stuck with those stories because we think that they serve us. But we really have to then stand in our personal power and unshackle from those shoulds to chart a far more authentic path that really serves us and lights us up. Awareness allows us to reframe these stories that we've had and bring through new perspectives. And especially where these perspectives and paradigms that we've held within our life are something that we've had for so long, it takes time. It's almost like that path has been carved out insidiously all the time, and it's a well-worn path. But when we form new habits, it's like going to gym and training those muscles. It starts off and it's a lot harder. We sometimes slip up and we have to then, really step back and say, let me try again better tomorrow. We can't judge ourselves because this is something we've had possibly for a lifetime that we used to think served us. But we really have to look at all of the paradigms in our lives that need reframing. And in my book, I talk through a number of these, but obviously the list is not exhaustive. Things like self first is no longer selfish. That we need to look at how we collaborate rather than compete. The fact that we are all equal, special and unique, rather than using what I call running, that comparison on the ladder of life. And I go into these in a lot of detail, and I'll definitely be sharing more on these with you in the future. But really what I want to bring through in terms of any paradigm or construct that we have in our lives is consider that there is a truth, and then there is your or my truth. They're not necessarily all the truth. And we have to bring that subjectivity to what we're looking at. Because I think too often when we've formed an opinion or we've become beholden to a story that we tell ourselves, we often then almost confuse it for being the truth, rather than a truth that we hold for ourselves. We really need to understand that everyone comes with their own stories based on their backgrounds, their life experiences, and where they are in terms of their own journey in this lifetime. And really consider that your truths may just be that, your truths. When we start to bring that awareness to those stories that we tell ourselves, it's so important that we really understand that you don't have to achieve that sense of self-worth. We often, I think, growing up, again, it's one of those stories that we've told ourselves, is that we have to achieve worthiness. We have to struggle and strive. It has to be hard. And I think we often then postpone happiness as something that we can achieve at a later date, when we've lost 5 kilos, when we've qualified and achieved that degree, when we've delivered that, that big project at work and achieved that promotion. But what I want to remind people today is that you are worthy now. You were born worthy. We can't keep telling people that they have to be on this hamster wheel of life to achieve worthiness. But if we start with that default premise that you are enough now, that you don't have to struggle and strive to become worthy, it centers us back into that sense of being like worthy right now. It helps us align within ourselves and become less buffeted around by life. I mentioned earlier, when we don't trust ourselves, when we don't believe we're worthy, that's when we become untethered in life and we become blown from side to side by the winds and the storms that happen within our lives. But when we start from the place of trusting ourselves, knowing that we've effectively packed our own parachute and that we're enough now and our gifts are valuable, think about that, how that changes things. When we know we're worthy, we also then start to hold space for ourselves. And when we hold space for ourselves, that's when we become boundaried within our lives. And I've done an entire keynote on boundaries being badass. They're really foundational within our lives around how we really hold space for ourselves. And the fact that I did an entire keynote on boundaries should tell you exactly how important they are within our lives. It's a foundational hygiene factor. But I'm going to leave you with a few key points now because I think it's so fundamental. The biggest myth about boundaries is that someone else is crossing our boundaries. We often think that we're letting people down, that it's you or me when it comes to boundaries. But I believe it is you and me. We can both hold boundaries within our lives that are clear, consistent, and kind. And it's so important that we understand what serves us and where we need to start saying no more in our lives. Think about how your boundaries feel. Are they charged, triggered, and reactive, or are they easeful and gentle? Remember that no is a complete sentence when it comes to holding your boundaries. You don't have to over-explain your no's. And one of the most important things to bring to that conversation is that sometimes saying no is saying yes to yourself. Boundaries help us create space for alignment. They help us integrate our thoughts, emotions, and actions. We do what we say we're going to do. We feel aligned with that, rather than telling people one thing because we think it's what they want to hear, what we should say, and I say should intentionally, and then thinking another thing entirely. When we really integrate and create that alignment within ourselves, that's where our power is magnified. That's where we empower ourselves and others because we're true to our word and we really create that alignment within our energy and we really truly start to embody that personal power. And I use the word embody intention. Too often people think that power sits in our logic and our minds. And I often say to people that you've obviously got IQ and EQ, our intellect and our emotions. But without bringing that back into our body, into our instinct and our gut, intuition that comes through for us, that SQ, that soul quotient, it's like a wobbly stool. We need to really start to tune back into our bodies and what's going on within our nervous systems and how we're really showing up. Without that, we'll always be slightly off center and out of our personal power. When we are fully aligned and embodied in our personal power, we become a frequency holder for easefulness. And this is where I really start to tie in this concept of success through ease. And I say, it's not easy, but easeful. And I intentionally spell full with a double L because it should be full of ease. When we bring that easefulness through to how we show up in life, it's almost like we're saying yes to the things that light us up. We're saying no to the things that don't. And that's where we really come into the universal slipstream of our lives and things start to flow more easily for us. We stop trying to control everything, thinking that we know better. I used to think that I could control everything in my life and that through my sheer force of will, my mental will, my logic, that I could bend everything else to my way of thinking. But the only thing that bent was myself. I burnt myself out that way. And when I look back, I was hitting friction and resistance everywhere in my life because I thought I knew better than the real slipstream that was actually just showing up for me in life. How do you want your energy to introduce you before you even say a word? Your energy, your personal power is that calling card when you enter a room where you really start to say, this is me. I'm worthy of being here right now. I'm showing up in my power, not force, not overthinking and logic, but really centered and grounded into my personal power right now. And so I want to leave you with a few short areas around how you can embrace your elegant power. Be present in the moment. Trust yourself. Step back into your power. Unshackle from the shoulds. Consider and bring awareness to all of your perspectives so you can reframe them for ones that really serve you. Hold consistent and clear boundaries. Create space for awareness and alignment that really creates space for yourself to show up. Integrate and embody to own your personal power. I really want to thank you for being with me today. If you'd like to know more about how you can really own and embody your own personal power and embrace your elegant power, you're welcome to pick up a copy of my book, Embrace Your Elegant Power. There's, trust me, a lot more in this book other than a really short webinar that we've brought you through today. But one of the most important things for me is consider that energy you want to bring through and how you can start to trust yourself more. I've got personal coaching that you can always do with me. There's online courses available as well around how you can step into this. But for me, the most important thing is bringing an awareness and intention to how you do this every single day. If you'd like to know more, you can follow me at Nicky Rowbotham on Instagram or have a look at my website, nickyrowbotham.com. All of the resources and the links are there. You can also download a free PDF, Embrace Your Elegant Power Flow Plan, and also the first 2 chapters of my book are available on my website as you land, as a pop-up. So it's so important, if you really are interested in this journey of owning your personal power, that you get all of the support that you need. And most importantly, I'm here to help. I hope you start to embrace your elegant power today.